Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You are here for the Serenity Health webinar, all about men's health and the 10 widgets of wellness. I'm actually going to be your sort of moderator and host tonight. My name is Nicole McCallum. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for Serenity Health. And of course, our guest of honor is the illustrious Dr. Robert Fallis. For those of you who are not familiar with him, Dr. Fallis is a lead thinker and a lead provider of healthcare and information for aging, for wellness, particularly for men. He is the chairman of the Serenity Health Medical Panel, or Medical Advisory Panel, sorry, and he is also our director of men's health. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Fallis.
It's a pleasure to be here, I can tell you.
Excellent. So just a small housekeeping. We are going to leave time at the end for any questions you may have. At any time, please utilize the chat function. You can pop any of your questions right in there and we'll get to them at the end if we're not able to sort of incorporate them into the webinar as we go. And I'm going to leave you my personal information so you can follow up with me if you have any questions. And then, of course, a little surprise at the end as well. So, Dr. Fallis, I am going to throw a couple questions your way and then I'll let you answer and share your amazing wisdom. So let's just jump in. Men's health, it is of course a journey. And so often the goal of that journey is longevity. Everyone wants to be there for all the moments. But we don't really just talk about lifespan anymore. We also want to focus on health span. So can you talk us through that relationship, how lifespan and health span are connected, how they sort of are connected now and how they can be connected if we treat ourselves properly?
Absolutely. I think that just some housekeeping for me as well. So I want to thank you, Nicole, for having me and thank Serenity for co-hosting this as well. And full transparency, of course, I have a consultant role with Serenity. I've assisted them in creating their liquid nutraceutical and again, chair of their medical advisory panel. The plan for tonight really is to just talk a little bit about men's health. We really want to talk about the longevity and what that means to people and why that's important. And then at the end, we're going to talk about other things and answer questions that guys might have as we go along the way. The other thing that I want to just bring to note as well is the fact that men's health is really important. And we know that it's been important for a long time, but it's been neglected in a lot of ways. So when we talk about men's health, we're talking about keeping ourselves healthy for ourselves, for our family, and I think that all of this is important. There's my transform. That's not me, by the way. I've got better tattoos. So
it's the only way we can tell it's not you.
So when we talk about longevity, we have to talk a little bit about some terminology here a little bit tonight. So bear with me because it's important. So when we talk about longevity, we're not talking about just kind of how long you're going to live. It's much more than that. And longevity is really kind of broken into its own research and science kind of branch, but it's a combination of a number of different branches of medicine. It's got genetics, there's nutrition involved, there's biogerontology, socioeconomics. Now there's regenerative medicine coming into it as well. So there's all sorts of really cool factors that are now coming into longevity. But when we talk about longevity, we want to talk about the quality and quantity. So we're talking about lifespan and health span. So, okay, so what does that mean? This is probably the most important slide of the evening. So I want to talk a little bit about this and what it means. So we've got an X and Y axis. On the bottom is the lifespan. So we're going to assume tonight that lifespan here is all about the life expectancy, the average number of years that a person is expected to live. So that's what we're going to consider as our lifespan. Health span is another name for it in medicine is the HALE or health adjusted life expectancy. So it's kind of the average number of years that a person can expect to live in full health, not hampered by a disabling illness or injury. So that's important. So as you see on the one birth, you expect to be 100% health at birth, and most are. And then as we carry on over time, you can see that our lifespan extends but our health span diminishes over time. Now, the other important thing about this is when you look at the middle line here, the middle line, so for Canadian men, currently the average lifespan or life expectancy for men is about 80 years. For women, it's 84, but for men, it's about 80. Okay. And so what we want to see then, but the problem here is that the average health span for men is 69 years. So that means, if you think about this, the average life expectancy for men is they're going to live to, on average, about 80 years. But their health span, living without being hampered by disabling illness or injury, is 69. So we're leaving 11 years on the table. So the last 11 years of our lives are in a position where we always have an illness or an injury that impacts our ability to enjoy our life and to do the things that we want to do as we age. So that's important. So what we need to do is we have to close this gap. And the people who've done the best with this are some of the centenarians, meaning people who live to 100. And those people seem to live a longer life, live to 100, and they have what's called squaring the curve. So instead of having this diminishing curve over time, what you find is they live a longer, healthier life for a longer period of time, and then they kind of drop off right at the end. So instead of having a 10, 11, or in the circumstance of women have a 15-year gap between health span and lifespan. For men, it's 11. But the last years, what you want is to live a long, healthy life where you can do everything you want to do, enjoy all the things you used to enjoy, and then you literally die quickly at the end. That's really the goal. That's the ultimate goal in longevity, because then we're looking at both the benefits of lifespan and health span, and in trying to, as I said, we could need to narrow the gap or close the gap between the two of them. And we've done a remarkable job over the last 100 and 120 years. You know, if you think of lifespan in the early 1900s was about 54 years, and now it's on average about 80 for men. So we've done a phenomenal job with lifespan, but we need to do a better job with the health span aspect. And where we're going to reach and look for how do we do this is we're going to look to the blue zones of the world. And the blue zones are identified. And if you read Dan Buettner's book on blue zones, it's locations on Earth that have about a 10 times increase of centenarians per capita than other places on Earth. And there's traditionally 5 spots in the world that they researched this. So this is people who they have individuals who live much longer in life. They have much healthier lives. And then in those locations, it's Okinawa, Japan is kind of the classic example where there's a significant number of centenarians. Sardinia in Italy, Icaria in Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in the United States. So those were traditionally the 5. And then Singapore is the 6th now because their life expectancy has increased about 35 years since 1965. So they've done something magical that's improved things substantially for their individuals. And we need to look at what other people are doing, what the successes that they have, and how they are able to attune to a success and copy some of those things. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to learn from others what they've done to do this exact thing that we're looking at doing.
That's amazing, Dr. Wallace. Thank you. I'm personally not thrilled that women's gap is 15 years, but we're talking about the men tonight, so we're just going to put that aside. So basically, getting older is the problem, but how we get older really matters. And I think we all understand what it means to age, from a chronological perspective. But in terms of our body, like when we're aging, what's really happening to us on the inside?
So when we look at aging, the problem is aging. And aging, when you look at the definitions, again, we're looking at terminology here. It's a progressive loss of physiologic integrity, leading to impaired function and increased vulnerability to death. Well, that's a pretty disheartening definition.
That's dark.
That is very dark. But there's more. I mean, the good news is when you're looking at some of the studies now coming out, showing that aging research shows us that we can adjust the age of, the rate of aging, and it's not all written in your genetics. I think that's the other kind of really important thing to kind of leave today, is that just because your father had Alzheimer's disease does not mean that you're going to get Alzheimer's disease. Just because your grandfather had heart disease does not mean that you're obligated to get heart disease. We know that disease and aging are linked specifically, but the linkage of genetics to overall health and aging is only about 15 to 30%. So on average, they say about 20 to 25% is genetically linked, but we've got all this, 75% options of what we can change and do that will really help us live a longer, healthier life. And we need to know, what are those things? When I was going through medical school, we used to often write on death certificates, that people died of diseases of old age. That's not true, because people do not die of old age. They die of diseases related to old age, but not from old age itself. So that's the other thing that we need to discuss today. And the fact that aging is the number one risk factor for disease. So when you look at this graph, you can see that whether you're looking at heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD or emphysema, pneumonia, doesn't matter. Everything gets worse after around 45 to 55, right? So all of a sudden, all these lines start to go up. If you look at it as well, the other thing that people don't recognize is aging is the strongest risk factor for disease. In fact, when you look at people who die of lung cancer, everyone says, well, smoking is the number one risk of lung cancer. No, it's not actually. It's number two. Aging is the number one risk of lung cancer. But when we look at all of the diseases of aging, whether we're looking at, obesity or diabetes or high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, all the single most common risk factor, the highest risk factor that outweighs all others, is aging. So the question is, what can we do? How can we turn this around? How can we fix this? And the other thing that's, I think, really interesting is when you look at some of the studies they've done, if you were able to tomorrow cure cancer or cure heart disease, and you combined those, that would probably give us a little bit more of a life expectancy as humans, probably about 5 to 10 years. But if you're able to slow aging, the studies are now showing that we can actually add on probably about 30 years. So this is why you're hearing now in the longevity circles of research and education talking about how to keep people, how can we get people to live longer? Well, if we slow or adjust aging, we can do that, and up to 100 to 120 years of age. Jean Chalmant in France was the longest living person that we know has recorded and proven that her age was accurate. And she lived to over 122 years of age.
Wow.
Now, the other weird thing about her is she smoked for the first 117. So she smoked right up to the age of 117, and then she decided she was going to quit smoking. So there's something about her genetics or things that she was doing that allowed her to live to 122. And we need to learn from these individuals. And I think, when we look at blue zones and we look at centenarians and research what's made them happy and what's allowed them to live longer, we're going to learn a lot and just garnish that information. So the other thing is when we talk about the research that comes out on aging, the one problem is this is called the wear and tear hypothesis of aging. So when you look at this you'll find it in a lot of journals when you talk about aging, the hallmarks of aging, and you can see that there's a lot of it's really genetic based, right? So you've got all sorts of, epigenetic alterations and mitochondrial dysfunction and stem cell exhaustion and all of this sort of stuff, saying that these are the patterns, these are the hallmarks that we see in aging. Well, we do, but this is a hypothesis, so it's not necessarily proven. There's an element here of truth, but we know that the hereditability is about 20 to 25%. So it doesn't explain, for example, the number one killer of humans worldwide, which is heart disease. Hearts don't get all of these wear and tear changes and then just stop working. There's different things that occur that lead to heart disease. So when we look at aging, we have to look at the chronic disease and understand what the processes of that disease are in order to understand what the process of aging is itself. Okay. So the next step is let's look at men specifically again. Like, what are the things that kill men? And again, this is a bit of a dark topic, but we need to understand what kills us so that we can address those factors and change those factors, change the vector of illness and death for men. So Canada is different than the US, and it's different than almost everywhere else in the world. Cancer is the leading cause of death in men in Canada. Almost everywhere else in the world, it's heart disease. Okay. In the US, it's heart disease. So cancer is responsible for 27% of all deaths in Canada, and heart disease about 18%. So if you look, and then accidents you'll see as well, it's right up there as well. COVID, again, this was 2021 stats. So this COVID-19 deaths were kind of tailing off from 2020 and on. So this will disappear over time, or decrease over time for sure. And then you can see cerebrovascular, that's basically strokes. And then lower respiratory disease, that's pneumonia, that's emphysema, COPD, diabetes. So you can see how these are the top 10. Now, basically, if you look at the top 2, that's almost 47% of all deaths in men is cancer or heart disease. Okay. So everything that we talk about for men has to address this, because 1 in 2 men are going to die of heart disease or cancer. So we have to talk about these ones as the most important thing. So anything that we talk about longevity wise, either lifespan or health span, has to address these top 2. And so when you look at 7 of the top 10 are influenced by metabolic disease or metabolic dysfunction. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We know that 65% of Canadians are overweight or obese. And we know that about 30 to 47% of all Canadians are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. So let me say that again. Almost 50% of all adults are pre-diabetic or diabetic and are overweight or obese. So, and I'm no different. I carry extra weight, and I'm always trying to correct that. But metabolic disease affects 7 of the top 10. We can fix this. This is something within our grasp. We can change this and make this better. We just need to know what to do next.
So that's a great next question. I mean, we obviously do have a much better understanding of what's happening in our bodies now. There's a lot of data, but why do we still have this gap then between health span and lifespan? Like, why it seems to be not only persisting, but the problem is growing. So where's the problem coming from?
Well, here's the problem. So in Canada, our problem is partly the system. Because a lot of Canadians don't have access to timely, proactive, personalized medical care. The Canadian Medical Association president basically said the healthcare system is on its knees in Canada. 7 million, it's gone up since we did the slide. So 6.5 to 7 million Canadians don't have access to a family doctor. 2.5 to 3 million people in Ontario don't have access to a family doctor. So part of it's our system, right? So we need to get our system better. Our system has always been, and this is not a fault in this, it was just the way it was always designed, as a reactive system. So it's a system that, you get sick or you break your arm, you go to the hospital, you go to your doctor, and they fix it. That's the way the system was designed. It's never been set up to be a proactive or preventative model. But when you look at the things that are killing us now, as opposed to killing us 150 or 200 years ago, it's not the infections that are killing us. It's not the trauma. It's not the, accidents and injuries. It's that metabolic change. It's the heart disease. It's the neurovascular, neurocognitive diseases. It's all of the diabetes and whatnot. Those are the things that are now killing us as individuals, and the cancers. But all of those have a link to metabolic health. And again, we can correct this part. We can get this part better, but it takes a different approach, not a reactive approach. We need a proactive or preventative model approach in order to get this better. So the other problem, of course, is men. We are poor advocates of our own health. We're less likely to seek treatment. We tend to, delay, deny, and dismiss. Even though 45% of Canadians live with at least one chronic disease, up to 45% of men develop cancer in their lifetime. But often we don't get checked. And I'll tell you a story. So here's a classic story of a guy. So I had a good friend, still have a good friend. He's still alive, but he if you understand about cycling, you often, if you're a really good cyclist, you go out with a group called a peloton. And so a peloton is a group of riders, and the first rider breaks the wind for the riders behind. So there's the rider out front. He's breaking the wind so that all the rest can pedal a little bit with a little bit more efficiency and less effort. And then you all rotate through who's going to be the leader of the peloton, and you drop to the back of the group. So he was out riding with his group in a peloton, and every time he went to the front of the peloton, he started getting chest pain. And then he's, oh, that's odd, because he's a really fit guy. He rides like 50 to 100 kilometers in a ride. And then he'd drop back to the peloton, and the chest pain would go away and he'd be fine. And then he would go back to the front and he'd get chest pain again. And he gets home after the ride and tells his wife, this is the weirdest thing. Every time I was leading the peloton, I was getting chest pain. And then when I dropped back, it would go away. And thank God she was a nurse. She goes, "You're an idiot." She goes, "We're going to the emergency right now." He goes, "Why?" She goes, "You're having a heart attack."
No.
So they went to the emerge. Of course, he had a coronary blockage, and he needed a couple stents put in, and then he was fine after that. But it's putting that together, right? Sometimes you just don't put things together, or as men, as we tend to do, we delay it. We hope it's going to get better. We deny it's going on, or we dismiss it altogether. So, as I tell people, a healthy person has 1,000 wishes, and a sick person has but one. And if you recognize there's a problem, then you can address it and get things better. So anyways, he's doing fabulous now, still riding, but thank goodness his wife was there, and she was an ER nurse, and she just recognized the symptoms and was able to do okay.
That's crazy. And we actually have a comment in the chat that the story of cycling happened to me. I did not know I was having a heart attack. So I'm glad you're still with us.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, I mean, I love the picture of the toe tag. I think a picture does say 1,000 words, and that's very, gentlemen, if that's not connecting with you, I think nothing will. But Okay, so we've identified the problem. We've got to close the gap. So let's talk about solutions. You've got your 10 widgets of wellness. Let's start breaking it down and solve this problem.
Okay. So first of all, I mean, a lot of us know that a widget it's a small but integral part of an overall more complex machine or complex system that is important for performance and overall functioning. So all of these are widgets. All of these are important aspects. And some of this stuff we know, we've known this forever. But as we know through learning, we have to have things repeated constantly for us to learn effectively, whether it's auditory or visual, or depending on the kind of kinesthetic learner that you are. But we need to have the same message come back to us. So here's the message. Here's some of the solutions. And I'm going to go through each of these individually with, okay? So we know again that 1 in 12 Canadians have what's called multimorbidity, meaning they're living with 3 or more chronic conditions. 1 in 12 Canadians. So that's a lot. Again, we know that 65% of us are living and are overweight or obese, and that up to 47% have diabetes or pre-diabetes. So, well, that's a great place to start, right? So let's talk from there. So number 1, diet. So I call it, really it's diet is food is medicine. So what we eat affects us, and we know that. And we know that we need to eat more effectively and less burgers and fries and more, salads and eating healthy. So where do you start? So sometimes, and often I'll send people on a Mediterranean diet quest, because I just find over 35 years of medicine, I often send people back to Mediterranean diet because it's easy to do. Families can do it, so adults can have it, but kids can have it. It tends to focus on vegetables. It reduces meat a little bit. It adds in seafood, and the fat source is going to be the extra virgin olive oil. So it tends to be a complementary diet. People can lose weight on it. You can have healthier. You can age with it. And it's interesting that, several of the blue zones in the world happen to be in the Mediterranean basin and happen to be following a Mediterranean style diet. Now that changes a little bit depending on where you live in the Mediterranean basin, but a lot of it's very, very basic and very similar. The other thing is for diet is to eat a little bit less meat, eat slower so you fill, because it sometimes takes 15 to 20 minutes for your stomach to get messages to your brain that you're full. And so those are important things. Intermittent fasting and fasting. A lot of those things work, especially for men. Men do really well with intermittent fasting. Taking a break from food is not a bad thing to do.
I think that's very good advice for all of us.
And then exercise, movement is medicine. So the thing for guys, when you look at the overall standards of what we're supposed to be doing, we're supposed to be staying physically active. And we know that people who are physically active have a 30% lower chance of dying in any given year. Okay, but only about 1 in 5 Canadians get the recommended amount of vigorous exercise per week. And what is it? It's about 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. That breaks down to about 21 minutes per day. So the patients I look after, I always tell them, look at 21. That's the minimum. You should be doing at least 20 minutes a day, probably more towards an hour. Try to do something every day. And it can change. It doesn't have to be the gym every day. You can, do a hike for an hour or two. You can ride your bike. You can play tennis for an hour. Change it up so it keeps your interest, but every day you should be doing something. When we look at what type of exercise, we know that when you look at longevity studies, zone 2 is super important. So are resistance or strength exercises, because what you do in your 30s, 40s, and 50s plays a huge role when you get into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. So you're really stacking the deck if you're exercising a lot in your early years, because then in your later years, you will be much further ahead than all of your peers. Balance and flexibility exercises are really important. And so I've neglected those over the years, and I'm trying to do more of that. I try to do Tai Chi now and things such as that to help with both balance and flexibility. So that's number two. So movement is medicine. Work. Men need purpose. So Stephen Hawking said, work gives you meaning and purpose, and life is empty without it. Costa Rica, they call it plan de vida or life plan. In Okinawa, they call it ikigai, which is knowing your sense of purpose, your reason for getting up in the morning. And as a physician who's treated people with substance use disorders for over 20 years, men do well when they've got a purpose, whether it's work. It doesn't have to always be monetary work. It can be volunteer work, but when men have a purpose, they do way better than when they don't have a purpose. So that, I think, is really important. People who live with a purpose and with work, doesn't have to be monetary work, live 5 years longer than those who don't. People who volunteer lose weight and have lower rates of heart disease and heart attacks, depression, blood pressure problems, and cognitive functions enhanced, and longer lifespans. So if you're retired, volunteer. Those are important things. The next thing is sleep. So sleep is super important. So people who want to lose weight, people who want to build muscle, it's important for all levels of things. So whether it's cellular repair, immune function, cardiovascular health, cognitive performance and memory, emotional regulation, energy levels, hormone balance, all of it is important for sleep. And on average, most men get about 5 to 7. We need to kind of push it a little bit more. We should be trying to get 6 to 8 if we can. And it has to be restorative sleep. You have to wake up feeling rested, which you won't if you have sleep apnea. So if you think you have, periods where you're snoring a lot during the night, then, or stopping breathing, which is sleep apnea, potentially, go get that checked and get treatment for that, because that will allow you to live a longer, healthier life as well. The next thing we talk about is mood. So stress modification. Stress is a huge factor for all of us, and we all know that COVID did not give us any benefits. It caused a lot of aggravation and stress for a lot of people. So when we talk about modification of stress, I always ask guys where they are at times, because it's either mild, moderate, or high. Most guys run moderate or high, it seems, especially in your formative years when you're busy building family, building career, etc. And good stress or bad stress, they both lead to the same thing. They still lead to an increase in your cortisol levels and a reduction in your testosterone levels. You have to find a way of modifying stress. And we're talking about not alcohol, not drugs, not smoking, not doing the things that are going to be problematic for you. Get a pet, right? Get a dog. Dogs work. They're very therapeutic for us. Okay. The next of our S's is the supplements. So most people take supplements. Almost 75% of Americans take supplements. Most people take them. It's over $200 billion per year in the supplement industry. And again, supplements, the name supplement comes from dietary supplements. It's meant to fill the gap between your diet and what you're not getting in your diet. So supplements are important. And that's why I put this up here for you. So people see their little handful of pills that they take. Serenity has created a liquid nutraceutical, which has like 15 different supplements, all in one, 30 cc bottle. So again, trying to improve things. And again, when we're talking about supplements, we're trying to optimize things. We're trying to maximize performance for people. We're trying to get them so that they can live longer and healthier. And it's one more aspect that might help you, especially if you've got dietary gaps that need assistance. This is in this Serenity Liquid protocol, so you can see what's in it. It's basically almost everything is an anti-inflammatory in nature, And you can look at that. Serenity can help you with that if you're interested. The other thing is screening tools. So when we're talking about screening tools, we're talking about getting checked. And so when we get older, when we're aging, we need to keep an eye on things, and you need to know what them as well as everybody else. I mean, so your family doctor might know if you have one, but otherwise you need to get your blood pressure checked, right? 70% of Canadians have high blood pressure when they're over the age of 60. We need to know what our biomarkers are, and that's kind of a fancy term for what's your blood work tell you. And you need to understand it. This is you. This is the most personal aspect of you, your blood work, and knowing what's in your blood work. That's important. When you're over 50, you need a colonoscopy, right? When we talk about cancer in men is prostate cancer, colon cancer, and lung cancer. Lung cancer and colon cancer are preventable. If you have a colonoscopy and they trim off the polyp before it becomes cancerous in your 50s, you won't die of colon cancer in your 60s or 70s. So these are all important things. Knowing your metabolic health, knowing what your blood sugar is doing, what's happening, that's important. Getting a prostate screened when as we get older, that's important as well. So screening tools are important, whether it's blood pressure or others. We need to be following these things up. Probably one of the most underrated things is the other S is social connections, or building community. This again was shown in COVID, just how important social connections are. We really struggled, and seniors specifically struggled with lack of social connection, and young people struggled with lack of social connections during the COVID year. So we once again realized just how important social connections are when it comes to our health. And when you look at the Statistics Canada, it's showing that about 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 Canadians over the age of 15 describe themselves as lonely most all of the time. Up to 40% of Americans say that they're lonely most or all of the time. Those are shocking numbers, and we know that we need to do better. And as guys, we know we need to do better. And again, the blue zones show us the importance of this, because all of the blue zones have a significant component is social connections. The thing that keeps us living longer and healthier is our social connections. When you look at the longest running longevity study ever done in the world, it's the Harvard longevity study. It's been running for over 75 years now, tracking men and now their children and now their wives on what makes them live longer and what's giving them happiness and fulfillment in their life. And it's never about money, prestige, accumulating more things. It's always about the thing that if you have a solid social connections and rewarding positive relationships in your 50s, you are much higher. You've got a much higher chance of living into your 80s or beyond and being fulfilled and healthy. So these are really important. We know that women do a better job than men. They always have. They're much more intuitive and connected with regard to friends and family. Guys, we need to do a better job. And as guys, we often have trouble doing this, but the value of male bonding is profound. It can allow us to live a longer, healthier life. We need to do a better job. And one of the things I've learned is guys need a reason. You need an excuse to socialize. So find that excuse, whatever that is, and construct your wellness clan. And whether it's, old timers hockey, or whether it's a chess club, or whether it's, learning how to speak Japanese, it doesn't matter. You just need a reason to get together and do it regularly and keep the same group together. And you will find that you will develop a strong core group of men who will look out and help you. Research has shown that if you don't have at least 3 friends that you can call on a bad day, your life expectancy is decreased by up to 8 years. So we need to surround ourselves with friends and family, of people who support us in a positive and productive way so that we can live long and healthy lives. Okay. The final one is stop doing shit that kills you. Now, we all know this, but I'm just going to reinforce it again. If you're smoking, stop smoking. Even Jean Calvert stopped at 117 years of age. If you're over drinking, cut back or stop. If you're doing drugs, cut back or stop. And overeating is really, and our North American diet is really, that's the canary in the coal mine. That's the thing that's killing us more than anything else, really. Because so when you look at sugars and refined carbohydrates, that is the reason why we've got a obesity epidemic in North America. That's the reason why people are dying early. That's the reason why people are getting cancers and diabetes and heart disease and lung disease and all the other problems, because of a lot of it because of our diet. We need to do a better job with that as well.
Dr. Fellis, thank you so much. This is such amazing information. You also did touch on hormones as one of the widgets of wellness. And for men, that obviously means testosterone. There's a lot of information about testosterone out there, some of it good, some of it bad. I'm wondering if you can sort of quickly walk us through some of the science, some of the benefits, the pros, the cons, and really kind of take away a lot of the clutter that exists about this very important topic.
Yeah, I saved this for the end because guys who know me know that I've spent decades treating men with low testosterone, and I believe it's one of the areas of medicine that can profoundly change a man's life. All of a sudden, they go from a person who, what we used to call a grumpy old man, where they're feeling, past their peak, lack of motivation, low energy, can't sleep at night, falling asleep in the afternoon, anxious, nervous, anxiety, depression, don't want to go to the gym, don't want to have sex with their spouse. They're tired all the time. That's often low testosterone. And what a lot of guys don't recognize is the fact that from around the age of 30, somewhere in your 30s on, we lose about 1 to 2% of our testosterone per year. So it's a very slow, insidious process. So unlike menopause for women, which is profound, symptomatology is profound, and it happens fairly quickly. With men, it takes often years or decades. So eventually, usually in your late 50s or 60s, they'll wake up and they go, man, I don't feel like I used to. And my motivation sucks, and I can't, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to work out. I'm gaining fat around my midsection. And often that can be, not always, but can be testosterone for men. So the problem with testosterone, there's got such bad press because of the Olympics and because of performance enhancing, using it as a performance enhancing drug, and because it's on, Health Canada, so it's on a restricted rate of medications in North America. So unlike female hormones like estrogen and progesterone, which is not under a significant burden of proof that because it doesn't cause performance enhancing effects per se, at least not in the sports realm, let's put it that way. So, but when we're talking about testosterone replacement for men, we're talking about affecting almost everything in their quality of life. So improving their muscle mass, strength, bone density, libido, sexual function, mood regulation, cognitive function, sleep, energy, confidence, motivation, really their quality of life. And it's one of the areas of medicine, when you treat people, it can profoundly change that for men from where they were to where they want to be. So the other problem with testosterone is it's got a large range, and the range runs from about 8 to 32 to 34, depending on the lab. And so they could be 8.1, and often their family doctor will say, oh, you're in the normal range. It's all good. What I tell guys is, yeah, you might be in the normal range, but it's like an algebra test. If you're scoring less than 50% of where you should be, that's probably not where you want to be. You probably want to
Technically,
be,
you're failing.
yeah, you're failing. So you probably want to be, if you can be, back to about 80%, 90% of the range. You want to optimize the range. And there's a number of tests in medicine where we want to optimize. And there's some tests in medicine where being within the normal range is just fine. In testosterone, it's all about optimizing the range. And normal is not optimal. So then the other thing I always tell guys is, okay, there's risks. There's risks with everything. So what are the risks of testosterone for men? And the top ones are the top three. So number one, once you start treating guys with testosterone, you're kind of obligated to keep treating them forever. Now, you can stop. They can always stop. I mean, that's the choice people have. But the thing is, if you stop, it's just going to drift back down to where it was before, or maybe even a little bit lower. Remember, it drops by 1.6% per year. Number two is it always affects fertility. So if we're treating young men who are wanting to have families, not a great idea, number one. Number two is if you do, you have to do other things in order to try to preserve that fertility for men. That's really important. And then number three is some guys, probably about 20%, can get some testicular shrinkage over time because you're on an exogenous testosterone. That's important, but not to everybody, but to some. So we always talk about that. So those are things. Then the other things are all the list, where you can get increased red blood cell production, you can get improved sex drive, which is a good thing for the man, but you kind of want to warn them and let them know that if they're 65 or 70 and all of a sudden you're giving them increased libido, maybe their partner's not as interested in that as they are. So you got to kind of coach them a little bit on what to do. Okay.
So you're warning the wives or their partners. You're not warning the men themselves.
Yeah. You got to warn both. So, and you got to tell people what's potential. What are the possibles? So all of this stuff means you monitor guys. So if somebody puts you on testosterone and says, see you in a year, find someone else who can look after you, because it's really important that this is monitored with your biomarkers to keep an eye on things to make sure that everything is good. The important thing to know is two things for sure that you leave tonight knowing. Number one, testosterone does not cause prostate cancer. That's important. We've known that for 20 years, even though family doctors will still tell you that it does. And number two, testosterone does not cause cardiovascular disease and strokes. We've known these things for 15 to 20 years, but still the message out there is not getting through to some individuals, so that's important, okay?
And Dr. Fallis, just a quick question. When you are talking about follow-up, obviously you can't just sort of leave someone for a year. What's sort of the timing that one should expect to have? Like 3 months, 6 months? When do you want that first check-in to be?
Oh, that's a great question. So usually about 6 to 12 weeks after you start somebody with testosterone, you want to be monitoring and seeing, where it's going. And then you do it probably about every 12 weeks or so for the first year, 12 to 16 weeks, because you want to bring it to maximal. You don't want to make it too high. You don't want to have it too low. You want it just right. And so that takes a little while to figure out what that's going to be, because all men are unique and different, and everyone, has a different number that they need to be in order to get them to optimal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Then when we talk about the rewards are profound. So this is why I get upset when people's family doctors or primary care practitioners tell them, this is all part of the aging process. You should just, embrace getting old and having no testosterone. Well, you can, but you have a choice. And as a choice, we know that studies have shown us since probably 2015, the cardiovascular benefits of testosterone is about a 30% reduction in heart attacks and strokes. It's about 40% reduction in all-cause mortality by optimizing testosterone in men who have low levels. So we're actually improving their lifespan and their health span by doing so, and that's important. because there's very few things that in medicine that will change that amount of time and that amount of scope. So that's important. You get an improvement in sleep and sex drive, mood gets better. Men who are often on antidepressant medications often have, I find men who've been on 4 or 5 different ones, and they come to me and they say, I can't get better. I'm depressed all the time. Well, they'll always be depressed until you correct the underlying problem, which can be, low testosterone. And once you've corrected that, then all of a sudden, magically, their depression gets better or goes away completely, and their anxiety gets better or goes away completely. These are the things that are so rewarding about treating men with hormone replacement therapy, is because you can make a profound change in their lives. Cognitive function is better. Their muscle strength, muscle mass gets better. They go to the gym more often. Their bone health gets better. If they had erectile dysfunction, that usually improves. But most importantly is their vitality, their energy, their motivation gets better. And then you get a little bit of a flip of fat mass to lean muscle mass, where about 3 kilos of loss of fat mass and gain of lean muscle mass. So those are things that will happen over time. Those are an obvious benefit to men, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just for clarity, when we're talking about testosterone therapy, we are not talking about anabolic steroids, which it gets the bad rap with gyms and the Olympics and stuff like that. This is bioidentical, correct?
Yeah. So this is Health Canada approved, testosterone products that you need a license to prescribe. Your physician should be prescribing it. They should be monitoring it with you. And if you're buying it out of the trunk of a car from a bro, you're heading in the wrong path, right? You're gonna have trouble. And anabolic steroids are not the testosterone that we treat people with. We want to bring people back to where they were before, where they felt optimal. We're not trying to bring them into super physiologic ranges, which the people who are using anabolics are using for.
Right. Thank you for clarifying, because I think that's where a lot of the
Yeah.
misinformation out there exists.
Yeah.
And so testosterone, it's incredibly important, but I think we need to back up a little bit. Unfortunately, we can't oversimplify things. There are no magic bullets. And you did mention 10 widgets of wellness, which hormone health is one of them. I think 10 can feel like a lot to take on. So maybe we can review that list and you can go through that hierarchy and help us simplify it just a little bit.
Yeah, so there's the 10. I put them back up again so everyone knows what they are. The first 4, and then the last 6 are all S's. But there's your 10 widgets of wellness, I call them. But I call this is my holy grail. This is the holy grail. So these are the most important things. If you're only going to do, if 10 is overwhelming, then let's do something that's easier, right? And these are the ones. So diet and supplements I put together, because remember, diet's important. Diet is the fuel that keeps us running. And diet and supplements are dietary supplements to fill in the gaps. So this is food as medicine. Exercise is probably one of the most profound things that you can do. Exercise can change things. I wouldn't say more, but probably as much as diet with regard to longevity, lifespan, and health span. And again, what you do in your 30s, 40s, and 50s set the tone for your 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I call it movement as medicine. So exercise is crucial every single day. You don't take a break. You exercise something every day.
Right.
And then you optimize your hormonal health. Well, you'll need some help with that. You'll need some blood work done to check and find out where you are. And then we know that this is much more important than we ever thought in the past. And that's what I call constructing your wellness clan. So surrounding yourself with people who care about you, who want positive effects for you, who want you to succeed in life. This is important. It doesn't have to be your family. Sometimes it's not your family. And we know that, I mean, again, going back to treating addiction patients, which I've done for over 20 years as well, is we know that when you surround yourself with people who do drugs, the chance is you're going to do drugs, right? If you surround yourself with people who do don't do drugs, then the chance is that you won't. So surround yourself with people who are going to want you to succeed, not fail. That's, I think, the key.
That's amazing. Dr. Fellis, we have gone over time, but if anyone would like to stick around, we do have a couple of questions, if you don't mind answering them kind of quickly.
Absolutely.
The first one is when we were talking about diet and food as medicine, someone asked, what's your feeling on the keto diet? You did mention the Mediterranean diet. So they're diagnosed with prediabetes and their family doctor suggested keto.
Yeah, keto's great. Keto's a great diet. We don't need carbs to survive. I think that's the misnomer for lots of people. They think they need to have a certain number of carbs to survive. We don't. We need protein and we need fat. And we get those in our diet, we can survive for years. There was a guy in Scotland who lived on just fasting, because he was a very large man. He fasted for over a year.
Wow.
He was monitored by his physician so they could make sure his biomarkers were fine, but he did fine. He lost like 200 pounds, and it did phenomenal well, but all of his biomarkers were fine. And his blood sugar remained same, etc. So keto's a great diet. They're using it a lot, by the way, in Alzheimer's disease. So dementia and Alzheimer's, people who are on ketogenic diets tend to do really well, and you can really convert a lot of negative symptomatology that you see in dementia and improve some of that. And Dr. Dale Bredesen talks a lot about that in his book when he talks about the end of Alzheimer's. So keto is good. I find personally that keto is hard to do long term. I find it's great to do short bouts of it, but to do it for long term, I think it's really difficult for people. But I mean, it's not a bad diet.
What would you consider a short bout? Like a couple of months or?
Yeah, 3 or 4 months. Yeah, 3 or 4 months. A lot of people do keto in order to lose weight, and it's exceedingly effective in losing weight. Again, especially for men. Men tend to lose weight more easily than women, partly because of our hormonal mixture, right? Because we all have the same hormones. Men and women have the same hormones in our bodies. We just have 10 times more testosterone than women, and they have more estradiol and progesterone. So, but they still have testosterone as well. So yeah, so it's just easier, and keto diets work for lots of people. I find that people wear out of it. Same with the carnivore diet. After a while, people kind of lose interest in it and just want to kind of, go back to a more, not balanced, but more of a diet where it's a little bit easier to follow.
Right. Right. Thank you. Second question is when we're talking about testosterone replacement therapy, the question is, do we change the amount or strength of testosterone we take over the years?
Oh, that's another good question. The answer is yes. So what happens, it's a peculiar thing I found over time. So when you're treating men with testosterone, you start at a level, say they're, I don't know, say 50. I've got guys who are in their 80s now are still on testosterone. And what you find over time is often the amount of testosterone you need decreases over time, which is it's fascinating. And I don't know if I've never found research that's shown why that is, but I attribute it to like filling up a glass of water. So once it's filled, then you just need to trickle in a certain amount in order to keep it full. But you don't need massive amounts to fill it anymore. And I find often as guys get older into their 60s and beyond, is that they need less and less that does the same amount as did for 5 or 10 years earlier.
So very counterintuitive, but I guess that's also the importance of making sure that you have a doctor properly monitoring your values and taking the blood and stuff for you on a regular basis. We have another question. Oh, I'm not a pill taker for vitamins. Is there a multi-liquid supplement that can be suited to my needs instead? I can answer this one, and yes, there is. And it's the Serenity Health Nutraceutical. So it replaces 14 pills every day. Dr. Fellis went through the ingredients in there. It's really focusing on reducing your inflammation and helping to improve blood flow. And there is a special promotional offer that I put in the chat that I can repeat for 20% off. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is also in the chat.
And it's also Health Canada approved. That's the other
It
point.
is indeed, and really developed with our incredible panel of medical experts, Dr. Follis being one of them. So we're very grateful for the expertise we've been able to utilize. Another question, what about the risk of increased red blood cell as a result of TRT, and especially if you have a history of heart attack in your family?
So again, good question. So we often see an increase in red blood cell production for men on testosterone, but there's basically four reasons why you'll get that. So we see an increase in red blood cell production, hematocrit, and hemoglobin. Again, this is why it needs to be monitored over time, because only about 20% of men get this. So you got to figure out who's going to get it and who isn't. And four things increase hematocrit. And hematocrit's the viscosity or the thickness of the blood. And what we find is if you're a smoker, if you live at altitude, so if you're living in the mountains, that leads to increased hematocrit. If you're on testosterone, or if you have sleep apnea. So there's a significant number of men who have sleep apnea that don't know that they have sleep apnea. So testosterone can rise and elevate hemoglobin and hematocrit, absolutely. But so can sleep apnea. So if we're having trouble controlling it, we have to lower testosterone, but we often have to send guys for a sleep apnea study to find out if they truly have it and how severe it is, and then treat it, because once it's treated, it's much easier.
Right. Okay. Amazing. We do have a few more questions. I know we're very over time, so we're going to have to shut it off fairly soon. I think the actual meeting is going to close on us, but I think we have 3 more minutes. So is the only way to treat testosterone with needles?
No, there's lots of options. So there's skin creams, there's skin gel, there's a nasal gel in Canada that we use. And needles, we use needles because they're easy and because it's a once a week thing. And because everyone knows about it. So no, lots of options there.
Fantastic. This is a great question. When I started on testosterone 8 years ago, my arthritis pain was reduced by 90%. As the years have progressed, testosterone is not as effective for the pain. Do we know why?
Well, inflammatory markers are important. So we need to check inflammatory markers again. Testosterone is a fabulous anti-inflammatory. So often people who have pains, when you first put them on, they get better. But remember, we age and inflammation changes with age as well. So it might lose some effectiveness, or it may mean we need to adjust some of the nutraceuticals that people are having and direct them into other nutraceuticals that have other anti-inflammatory benefits.
Amazing. And that actually rolls into this next question. I've been taking supplements, and most supplements I feel no better than if I don't take any. Is the problem with the quality of the product, or are some supplements we take leaving no positive effects?
Yes, is the answer. So yes. So again, it's to fill in the gaps. So that's part of it. Number 2 is when you're talking about supplements, and especially when you're talking about multivitamins, I always tell people multivitamins have a little bit of everything, but not enough of anything. Right? So when you're talking about multivitamins, like even if it's men's over 50 and things like that, that's problematic because you're not getting what you need. Again, with certain, if you got to pick the supplement, and men's supplements are a little bit different than women's usually, and then you have to try to optimize them as much as you can within the range of Health Canada, within the range of reason.
Right. And yes, and again, I can speak on behalf of Serenity that we are literally replacing 14 pills in a 30 ml shot because, as Dr. Follis mentioned, there's no way you can put all of the stuff you actually need in proper quantities into one tiny pill. Trust me, we tried. So yeah, it really is about quality and the bioavailability of the vitamins that you're taking. So I think everyone, gentlemen, and there are some ladies on the call, I'm sure here, concerned about their husbands or loved ones. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm just popping my email back in the bottom. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And again, Dr. Follis, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I learn more every single time.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everybody. So nice to have everyone on.
Thank you guys. Have a lovely evening.
Okay, I know.